Hello and welcome to every Greenskin Lord ranked from worst to best. If you're not aware, this video is part of a series where I go through and rank every single legendary lord in Warhammer 2 in their own factions, and this is all building up to me ranking every single legendary lord in Warhammer 2 from all the factions in one big fat list, so definitely subscribe if you want to see that, because it is coming eventually. Now, quickly before we get started, I just want to run through the rules and criteria. So I'm going to be focusing on the campaign rather than multiplayer because that's kind of my thing, and anyone can make anything work in multiplayer if they are good enough. I'm also going to be taking into account everything I can that is specific to the Lord and faction. This includes the unique effects they bring to their faction, the effects they have on their army, and of course the Lord themselves and their performance in battle. Now, without further ado, let's start in 5th place. Is it really any surprise that it is Skarsnik? He starts at Karak as Garaz. He has no allies anywhere nearby, and also very few greenskins nearby to dominate with the tribe leader mechanic, so it is an extremely steep uphill battle. Your best bet is to rush along the mountains into the Badlands towards Karak 8 Peaks and take it on as quickly as possible. This is because you can only recruit orcs from Karak 8 Peaks, so until then you are limited to strictly goblin units. For his other faction effects, he grants a minus 50% to hero action cost and 100% XP from hero actions. He also grants minus 40% upkeep for goblin and night goblin units, and his War has a chance to contain doom divers. And he also unlocks a unique building chain once he eventually does reach Karak 8 Peaks. For his army effects, he comes with lightning strike right out the gate and can also use it with reinforcements, which is extremely powerful. He grants 14 charge bonus for night goblin squig hoppers, and of course brings the Skarsnik War ability. His starting units are Night Goblin Fanatic units, which are a poisonous goblin infantry with the Spinning Loons ability, and a Ragnarok Spider, which is a giant anti-large spider unit, and Night Goblin Squig Hoppers, which are Night Goblins on squigs with poison and piercing damage and pretty decent speed. Skarsnik himself is a smaller but still heavy-hitting fighter. He's definitely not the toughest lord in the world, so can be taken out if he gets surrounded. He deals poison, armor-piercing damage with a bonus versus large, so can take on units much larger than himself. Unfortunately, he has no access to spells or mounts, and all his items and abilities grant him a variety of buffs, debuffs, and some magical damage. Now, the reason for him being the lowest rank is that this poor lad was added alongside Belagar Ironhammer, and he suffers from pretty much the same downsides. His starting location is pretty bad, and is made so much worse by the fact that he can't recruit any orcs. Gobbo units are fine and all, but they just don't have the same toughness as orcs, so it can be a bit of a struggle fest to have none of them in your army. His other faction effects also don't do much to make it easier. That being said, his lightning strike effect is top tier and absolutely carries his army. He's also a decent fighter for sure, but he just doesn't stand up to the others due to his squishiness, small size, and lack of spells or mounts. Coming in 4th place, we have Ashag the Slaughterer. His faction starts at Red Eye Mountain. The Empire is right to the west, and the Dwarves are all to the south. He's also quite away from the Badlands, but can stick to the mountains for relative safety and a few easy confederations you can use to build momentum going into the south. For his faction effects, he has the suitable climate of Temperate, plus 40 relations with vampire counts and Arkan the Black. His War also has a chance to contain wyverns. He grants a 20% bonus to research rate, and a 25% bonus to income from sacking settlements. For his personal army, he doesn't really grant anything apart from the Ashag's War ability. For his starting units, he grants Forest Goblin Spider Rider Archers, which are spider riding arch units with poison damage and decent mobilities, Goblin Rock Clubbers, which are a powerful basic armor-piercing artillery unit, and Trolls, which are your armor-piercing but vulnerable and cowardly monstrous infantry. Ashag himself has a 75% bonus to his leadership aura size and plus 8 to his leadership aura effect. He is a heavily armored and heavy-hitting spellcaster and deals armor-piercing damage and has a nice amount of armor and a pretty decent melee stat, so can be a very formidable fighter. He also has access to the Law of Death, so can cast spells as well as fight on the front lines. He also has his Wyvern mount, Skull Muncher, which grants him flight and more HP and damage. His items and abilities grant him buff for himself and allies. Now, the reasons for his rank. He has a pretty good starting location aside from the close proximity to Ungrim, and the suitable climate preferences mean he has an easier time invading the Empire and the rest of the old world. The increased income from sacking is also brilliant, but the basically zero army effects is quite underwhelming. He's also a pretty great fighter with good fighting stats as well as the Law of Death. I didn't put him any higher purely because he doesn't really have that much going for him since he was a free LC Lord. He hasn't got anything particularly powerful that gives him a massive boost, so it's just kind of meh. Coming in at 3rd place, we have Grom the Paunch. He is the most recently added greenskin to the roster, and he starts at Massive Orcal. He is surrounded by Bretonnians, and Elfarion isn't that far away, so it can be quite tough to get out there, especially considering the unfortunate climate preferences. In my experience, he has to rush to Skarsnik and beat him to be in with a chance of surviving. As for his faction mechanics, he has access to Grom's Cauldron, which grants him a variety of buffs for himself, his units, and the faction in general. He also has the suitable climate of Temperate Island, which helps when invading the High Elves. Speaking of which, he has -80 relations with all High Elves, and his war has a chance to contain Goblin Pump Wagons. He also has -1 to recruit duration for all Goblin units. As for his personal army, they are granted 10 leadership when fighting elves, 10% physical resistance for all Goblin units, and -50% upkeep for chariot and pump wagon units. They are also, of course, granted the Grum's War ability, and the starting units are a Spiky Roller Pump Wagon, which is an armor-piercing chariot-style war machine, River Trolls, which are armor-piercing troll units that stink up the battlefield, and Stone Trolls, which are the toughest and heaviest hitting of all the troll units. As for Grom himself, he is a chariot-based large gobbo unit. He is heavily armoured and deals heavy anti-infantry damage, though not the most armour-piercing, and he also has a bunch of charge bonus due to him always being mounted on his wolf chariot. Aside from that, he has no other mounts or spells, and all his items and abilities grant various buffs for himself and allies. Now for the reasons for his rank. I would argue that Grom has possibly the worst start in the faction, just because if you want to expand into suitable territory, you need to take quite the pilgrimage and abandon your starting city, which sets you back quite a bit in the campaign. That being said, Grom's faction mechanics are far superior, basically because of Grom's Cauldron and all the insane buffs it can give to your faction and units. Would you like explosive archers? You can do that. Would you like regeneration for a lot of your units? You can do that. Would you like pretty much anything you can imagine buffing any of your units, your lord, or your faction? Then you can probably do it using Grom's Cauldron. His army effects are pretty mediocre and really just focus on his eventual high elf battle and pump wagon focus. As a battler, he's more difficult to use, but if used well, he can be pretty damn powerful with plenty of damage and charge bonus. Coming in second place, it is the original and greatest Grimgarh Ironhide. He starts at Black Crag, which is just south of Karaz Akarak. Opposite to the dwarves, this starting location has only got better since the introduction of the Greenskins into Mortal Empires. They are central in the old world part of the map, so have easy access to the other Greenskins for easy confederations nice and quick. Once that is done, they are also in a prime position to expand into the north, either via the mountains or the plains of the Empire. As for his faction mechanics, he can recruit Black Orc Big Bosses in all provinces, his war has an increased chance to contain Black Orcs, there is a 10% bonus to campaign move range for all characters, and a -15% upkeep for Black Orcs and Big Uns. For his army, he grants 12 leadership and 10 armor for Black Orc units, 30% bonus income from post-battle loot, and of course the Grimgarh's War ability. As for his starting units, he gets Orc Boar Boys, which are armor-piercing boar-based shock cavalry, Black Orcs, which are super tough armor-piercing great axe infantry, and Doomdiver catapults, which are excellent guided projectile artillery with fantastic damage. Grimgarh himself is a heavily armoured melee fighter who is insanely tough and does massive amounts of armour-piercing damage. He doesn't have any mounts or spells, so is limited in his speed and use outside of straight fighting, but when it comes to straight fighting, there isn't really anyone better. All his items and abilities grant buffs for himself and allies and debuffs for enemies. Now the reason for his rank is mainly down to a really great starting location with easy access to the other tribes as well as dwarf enemies. He has mediocre faction effects to be honest, but they ease the upkeep of some of the later key units, so they are pretty decent when you eventually get there. His army effects are pretty great for making more money and further buffing those key late game units. Grimgarh is also a great fighter, if a little basic, but if you're looking for someone to head your battles from the front, there is really no one better. Coming in first place, again, is it any surprise, is of course Wuzzag, the Great Green Prophet. His faction starts at Ekrund. They're in the centre of the Badlands with other Greenskins all around to dominate and grow seriously quickly. He also has pretty easy access to the north, where he can take on the Empire and the rest of the old world as soon as he's ready. He can also get easy territory in the south thanks to his climate preferences. He unfortunately does suffer from an uninhabitable climate in Frozen, but he does gain a suitable climate of jungle and desert. His war also has a chance to contain Savage Orcs, and his faction effects he grants -50% to enemy hero success chance and 25 charge bonus for Savage Orc units. For his personal army, he grants 15% physical resist, -50% upkeep and recruitment cost for Savage Orc units. And of course the Wuzzag's War ability. For his starting units, he gains Savage Orcs, which are physical resistance based melee infantry, Savage Orc Arrow Boys, which are slightly weaker Savage Orcs with bows and arrows, and a Giant, which is a useless arrow sponge, but you know, what can you do? As for Wuzzag himself, the main draw of this guy is the fact that he is an extremely powerful spellcaster with deceptive toughness and decent melee damage even without the armor piercing. He has access to the Law of the Big War, so has access to a range of spells to decimate his enemies. He has just the one mount that gives him more speed and a little bit of toughness, and all his items and abilities grant a bunch of buffs for allies and debuffs for enemies. Now, the reason for his rank is mainly due to the fact that he has the best start in the whole faction, since he can rapidly dominate the other tribes and control the whole Badlands in record time. Now, he doesn't have the most exciting or powerful faction effects, but they do assist with his Savage Orcs focused playstyle. His army effects further assist this by buffing them in a variety of ways, and Wuzzag as a fighter is brilliant with decent toughness with his resistance and great damage. And the lore of the Big War is just the cherry on top of this incredible fighting lord, as it is one of the best lores in the game for raw dog damage. Anyway, that concludes this ranking for the Greenskin Legendary Lords. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your ranking in the comments below. If you disagree with mine, I'd love to hear them. Be sure to like this video if you did enjoy it, and if you want to see more videos like this, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm uploading videos every single week. I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel of every tier, but in particular Kobe Said So and Nifty Norm, supporting me at that and Clean Ones tier. I really cannot thank you enough. One more time, thank you so very much for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.